Have you ever noticed that the most intelligent people are often the most misunderstood and the most alone? Not because they lack social skills, but because their minds operate on levels most people never reach. Intelligence isn't just about IQ or being smart in school. It comes in layers, each one changing how you see people, conversations, emotions, and even relationships. As intelligence deepens, comfort in crowds often fades, small talk feels empty, and solitude starts to feel safer than connection. In this video, we'll explore the 7 levels of intelligence, why each level reshapes your social world, and the hidden psychological reason why the smartest minds often walk alone, quietly observing a world that feels increasingly out of sync with them. Intelligence often begins in a way that feels familiar and socially acceptable. It starts with collecting information, memorizing facts, learning rules, and repeating what has already been discovered by others. At this level, intelligence is rewarded publicly. Schools, workplaces, and society at large praise those who can recall data quickly, follow instructions accurately, and produce correct answers. People at this stage usually fit in well because their thinking aligns with shared systems. Conversations are easy because they revolve around common knowledge, popular opinions, and widely accepted ideas. There is comfort in this form of intelligence because it creates connection. Everyone is learning from the same books, the same sources, the same authority figures, and this shared framework makes belonging effortless. But intelligence does not stop at memorization. As it deepens, something subtle begins to shift. The mind starts noticing relationships between facts instead of treating them as isolated pieces. Patterns begin to emerge. Instead of asking, "What is the answer?" the person starts asking, "Why does this keep happening?" or "How is this connected to something else?" This transition is quiet but powerful. Pattern recognition changes how reality is processed. The mind no longer relies solely on external validation to confirm truth. It starts forming internal models of how systems work, how people behave, how outcomes repeat themselves across different situations. This is where isolation slowly begins, not suddenly, but gradually. Pattern recognition creates distance because most social environments are not built for deep analysis. Many conversations are designed to reinforce shared beliefs, not question them. When someone starts seeing inconsistencies in commonly accepted ideas, they may feel a growing disconnect. They notice that what people say does not always match what they do. They recognize emotional cycles, behavioral loops, and predictable reactions that others remain unaware of. This awareness does not make them superior, but it does make them different. At this stage, intelligence becomes less about fitting in and more about understanding. The person may still enjoy learning, but rote memorization feels empty. Repeating facts without context feels meaningless. They want to understand underlying mechanisms. Why do certain people always end up in the same relationships? Why do the same conflicts appear in different workplaces? Why do societies repeat the same mistakes across generations? These questions pull the mind inward. Thinking becomes more reflective and less performative. Socially, this shift creates subtle friction. When someone sees patterns, they may struggle with surface-level discussions. Small talk starts to feel repetitive because the outcomes are already known. The mind predicts where conversations will go before they reach their conclusion. This does not mean the person dislikes people. It means their cognitive stimulation threshold has changed. They are no longer energized by exchange alone, but by depth, nuance, and exploration of ideas that go beneath the obvious. Isolation at this level is not dramatic. It often appears as quiet withdrawal. The person may speak less in groups, not because they have nothing to say, but because they see no value in repeating what is already understood. They may choose listening over talking, observation over participation. This can be misinterpreted as disinterest or arrogance, when in reality it is cognitive saturation. Their mind is already processing layers beneath the conversation. Pattern recognition also increases sensitivity to contradictions. When people say one thing and act another way, it becomes harder to ignore. Social rituals that rely on politeness rather than honesty feel exhausting. The intelligent mind at this stage does not necessarily want conflict, but it struggles with pretending. This creates internal tension. To maintain harmony, they must either suppress their insights or distance themselves from environments that demand constant agreement. As understanding replaces memorization, authority is no longer accepted automatically. The mind begins evaluating sources, questioning motivations, and examining incentives behind behavior. This applies not only to institutions, but to individuals. The person becomes more selective about who they trust because they can see patterns of inconsistency, manipulation, or unconscious behavior in others. Trust no longer comes from familiarity, but from coherence between words and actions. This selectivity can shrink social circles. Relationships based purely on proximity or habit may fade. The person might feel lonelier, but also clearer. There is a trade-off happening internally. Fewer connections, but more meaningful ones. Less noise, but more insight. The isolation that emerges is not always chosen consciously, but it is often tolerated because the alternative feels cognitively draining. Pattern-based intelligence also shifts how success and failure are interpreted. Instead of seeing events as random, the mind looks for contributing factors. This can lead to a sense of responsibility that others do not feel. When outcomes go wrong, the person asks what signals were ignored or what cycles were repeated. This level of reflection can feel heavy, especially when surrounded by people who prefer simple explanations or external blame. Emotionally, this intelligence creates a sense of being slightly out of sync with the world. The person may notice that jokes rely on predictable formulas, that trends follow repetitive arcs, that outrage cycles are recycled endlessly. This awareness can dull excitement for mass culture. What entertains others may feel repetitive or hollow. As a result, the person may spend more time alone, not out of sadness, but out of preference for mental stimulation that feels authentic. Importantly, this isolation is not caused by intelligence itself, but by mismatch. The environment remains optimized for memorization, repetition, and conformity, while the mind has moved towards synthesis and insight. Without spaces that value deep thinking, the person feels unseen. They may struggle to find others who enjoy exploring ideas without needing immediate conclusions. At this stage, solitude becomes a tool rather than a punishment. Alone time allows the mind to connect dots without interruption. It becomes a space where insights form naturally. The person may read widely, think deeply, and observe quietly. This inner world becomes rich, even if the outer social world feels thinner. The transition from memorization to pattern recognition is irreversible. Once the mind sees connections, it cannot unsee them. Conversations, systems, and behaviors are filtered through this lens automatically. This creates a permanent shift in how reality is experienced. The person is no longer just absorbing information, but actively interpreting it. This level of intelligence marks the beginning of true cognitive independence. The mind stops outsourcing meaning and starts constructing it internally. While this leads to growth, clarity, and insight, it also creates distance from those who remain comfortable with surface-level understanding. The isolation that emerges is not a flaw, but a side effect of deeper awareness. At its core, this stage represents the moment when intelligence stops being social currency and becomes a private instrument of understanding. The world remains loud, repetitive, and fast-moving, but the mind slows down, looks deeper, and begins operating on a different frequency. As intelligence deepens, the way conversations are experienced begins to change in a subtle but profound way. It is not that social interaction itself becomes unpleasant, but that the quality and depth of interaction start to matter more than the act of talking. Shallow conversations, which once felt harmless or even enjoyable, begin to feel mentally draining. This happens because the mind has evolved past surface-level exchange and now seeks stimulation through meaning, complexity, and insight rather than repetition and predictability. At this level, the brain processes information faster and more holistically. When someone engages in small talk, the intelligent mind often predicts the direction of the conversation within moments. The patterns are familiar. The topics repeat. The emotional cues are obvious. While others may feel comforted by this predictability, the deeper thinking mind feels understimulated. It is not boredom in a casual sense, but cognitive dissatisfaction. The brain is capable of more, yet it is confined to shallow loops of conversation that offer no new insight. This is why such conversations feel draining rather than neutral. Mental energy is being spent without meaningful return. The person listens, responds, nods, and reacts, but internally there is little engagement. It feels like running a powerful engine at idle speed. Over time, this creates fatigue, not physical tiredness, but mental depletion. The mind craves depth, but is fed surface noise instead. People often misunderstand this withdrawal. They assume the person dislikes socializing or lacks communication skills. In reality, the opposite is often true. Highly intelligent individuals can communicate very well when the subject matter engages them. They can speak passionately, thoughtfully, and with nuance when discussing ideas, systems, emotions, or questions that matter. What they struggle with is pretending that shallow topics are fulfilling when they are not. As intelligence increases, curiosity also changes form. It moves away from gossip, status updates, and repetitive stories toward understanding human behavior, motivations, and underlying structures. Conversations that focus solely on appearances, trends, or trivial details feel empty because they do not explore the why beneath the surface. The intelligent mind is less interested in what happened and more interested in what it reveals. This creates an internal conflict in social settings. On one hand, there is a natural human desire for connection. On the other hand, there is resistance to engaging in interactions that feel mentally hollow. To protect their energy, many intelligent people unconsciously reduce their social exposure. They speak less, choose silence more often, and selectively engage only when something meaningful emerges. This selective engagement can make them appear distant or reserved. In group settings, they may observe rather than participate. They listen carefully, not because they are shy, but because they are evaluating whether the conversation has depth. When it does not, they retreat inward. This retreat is not rejection of people, but a form of self-regulation. Another factor that contributes to the draining nature of shallow conversation is emotional awareness. Intelligent minds often pick up on subtle emotional cues, inconsistencies, and unspoken dynamics. In shallow interactions, people frequently say things they do not fully mean, exaggerate for approval, or speak to maintain social masks. Processing these layers requires effort. When there is no meaningful exchange to balance that effort, the interaction feels costly. Over time, this leads to a preference for fewer but deeper conversations. One meaningful exchange can be more energizing than hours of casual talk. This is why intelligent people often thrive in one-on-one discussions rather than large groups. Depth is easier to achieve without the pressure of social performance. This shift also changes how silence is perceived. Silence no longer feels awkward, it feels restful. In a world filled with constant chatter, silence becomes a space where the mind can recover. It allows thoughts to settle, connections to form, and energy to rebuild. Intelligent individuals often value silence because it gives them what shallow conversation cannot. Importantly, this does not mean that intelligent people believe shallow conversation is useless for everyone. They understand its social function. It builds rapport, signals safety, and maintains group cohesion. However, understanding its function does not make it fulfilling. Knowing why something exists does not mean wanting to participate in it excessively. This awareness can create feelings of isolation, especially when surrounded by people who rely heavily on surface-level interaction for connection. The intelligent person may feel out of place, not because they are superior, but because their needs have changed. Their mind is wired for exploration rather than repetition, and the environment may not provide enough stimulation. As a result, social energy becomes something to manage carefully. Intelligent individuals often plan their interactions, limit exposure to draining environments, and seek out conversations that challenge or inspire them. This selectivity is not antisocial behavior, it is adaptive behavior. It preserves mental clarity and emotional balance. Over time, this pattern reinforces solitude. Being alone becomes easier than navigating conversations that feel unfulfilling. Solitude offers control over input. The mind can explore ideas freely without interruption. This autonomy feels nourishing, especially when compared to the effort required to engage in shallow exchanges. The key distinction here is that it is not people who drain energy, but lack of depth. When intelligent individuals find others who enjoy meaningful dialogue, their energy returns. They become animated, engaged, and expressive. This reveals the truth behind the withdrawal. It is not avoidance of connection, but a search for resonance. As intelligence grows, the mind becomes less tolerant of noise and more sensitive to meaning. Shallow conversations are perceived as noise because they lack substance. This sensitivity is not a flaw, but a sign of cognitive refinement. The brain is optimizing for quality over quantity. This shift often marks a turning point in social life. The person begins valuing alignment over popularity, understanding over entertainment, and depth over constant interaction. While this may reduce the number of social interactions, it increases their significance. The draining effect of shallow conversation is therefore not a weakness, but a signal. It indicates that the mind is ready for more complex engagement. It reflects a transition from social stimulation to intellectual and emotional nourishment. As intelligence increases, awareness expands beyond information and ideas into the realm of human behavior. The mind begins to notice not just what people say, but how they say it, when they say it, and what they avoid saying altogether. Subtle patterns in tone, timing, body language, and emotional shifts become visible. This heightened perception is not something that can be turned off. Once the mind learns to read between the lines, it does so automatically. This deeper awareness fundamentally changes how trust is experienced. Trust, at simpler levels of thinking, is often given easily. It is based on familiarity, shared experiences, or social roles. People trust because it feels normal to do so. But as intelligence grows, trust becomes more complex. The mind starts evaluating consistency. It looks for alignment between words and actions. It notices when behavior changes depending on the audience. It detects when emotions do not match expressions. These observations do not come from suspicion, but from pattern recognition applied to people. With this awareness, blind trust becomes difficult. The intelligent mind understands that humans are driven by incentives, fears, desires, and unconscious habits. It sees that people are often unaware of their own motivations. This realization creates a psychological distance. When someone recognizes that even well-intentioned individuals can act out of self-interest or emotional impulse, trust becomes conditional rather than automatic. This does not mean intelligent people are cynical or cold. In fact, they often have deep empathy. They understand why people behave the way they do. But understanding does not equal vulnerability. Awareness creates caution. The mind learns that closeness without discernment can lead to disappointment, manipulation, or emotional cost. As trust becomes more selective, relationships change. The person may still interact socially, but with guarded openness. They share less personal information, not because they are secretive, but because they recognize the potential consequences of exposure. They have seen how information can be misused, misunderstood, or weaponized in subtle ways. This heightened awareness can feel isolating. In many social environments, trust is assumed quickly and deeply. People bond through shared disclosures, emotional venting, and mutual validation. When someone resists this pattern, they may appear distant or emotionally unavailable. In reality, they are simply calibrating trust based on observed behavior rather than social expectation. Intelligent minds also notice how power dynamics influence honesty. People often speak differently to those they admire, fear, or want something from. Compliments, agreements, and promises may shift depending on context. Recognizing this makes it harder to take words at face value. Trust becomes less about what is said and more about what is consistently done over time. This creates a preference for slow-building relationships. Intelligent individuals often need time to observe how someone behaves under stress, conflict, or pressure before fully trusting them. They pay attention to how others handle disagreement, how they treat people who cannot benefit them, and how they react when things do not go their way. These observations provide more reliable data than charm or verbal reassurance. At the same time, this level of awareness can feel burdensome. It removes the innocence of simple connection. There is a quiet longing for relationships that feel safe without constant evaluation. Yet the mind cannot return to unawareness. Once behavior patterns are visible, ignoring them feels dishonest to oneself. This tension often leads to emotional restraint. Intelligent individuals may choose to limit emotional investment until trust is earned. They may enjoy company, share ideas, and engage thoughtfully, but keep a protective boundary around their inner world. This boundary is not meant to exclude others, but to preserve psychological stability. As a result, they may have fewer close relationships, but those relationships tend to be deeper and more resilient. Trust, when given, is intentional and strong. It is based on evidence rather than assumption. This makes betrayal more painful when it happens, but also less frequent because trust is not given recklessly. Another factor that complicates trust is self-awareness. Intelligent individuals often understand their own vulnerabilities. They know where they can be influenced, emotionally triggered, or manipulated. This self-knowledge leads to caution. They recognize that trusting the wrong person can compromise their values, focus, or mental peace. This awareness also changes how they interpret kindness. They may question whether generosity is genuine or transactional. They may wonder whether attention is sincere or motivated by convenience. These questions do not come from paranoia, but from experience and observation. Over time, the mind learns that intentions are rarely pure or singular. Because of this, intelligent individuals often rely more on self-trust than external validation. They build internal stability rather than seeking reassurance from others. This independence can be empowering, but it also deepens isolation. When you rely on yourself, you need others less, and needing others less changes social dynamics. In group settings, this can create a sense of emotional distance. While others bond quickly, the intelligent person remains observant. They listen carefully, notice patterns, and reserve judgment. This makes them less likely to be swept up in groupthink or emotional contagion, but also less likely to feel fully integrated. Over time, trust becomes a rare and valuable resource. It is offered slowly, maintained carefully, and withdrawn deliberately when consistency disappears. This approach protects the mind, but it also limits spontaneity. Relationships become fewer, but more meaningful. This level of intelligence often brings a quiet loneliness, not because connection is impossible, but because genuine alignment is rare. Finding someone whose words, actions, and values remain consistent over time is uncommon. When such alignment is found, the bond can be profound, but until then, solitude feels safer than misplaced trust. Ultimately, increased intelligence reshapes trust into something intentional, earned, and deeply personal. The mind no longer operates on social default settings. It observes, evaluates, and chooses carefully, even when that choice leads to walking alone rather than risking emotional chaos. As intelligence deepens, solitude begins to transform from something that feels imposed into something that feels chosen. This shift does not happen because the person suddenly dislikes people, but because their inner world becomes more active, more complex, and more demanding of space. The mind starts generating ideas, questions, reflections, and insights that require uninterrupted attention. In crowded or constantly social environments, this internal process is repeatedly disrupted. Solitude becomes the condition in which thinking can breathe. Deep thinkers often discover that their best insights emerge when external noise is reduced. Without the pressure to respond, perform, or conform, the mind moves freely. Thoughts connect in unexpected ways. Emotions settle. Awareness sharpens. Solitude provides a mental landscape where depth is not only possible but natural. This is why many intelligent individuals begin to protect their alone time, not as escape, but as preservation. There's also a psychological safety in solitude that cannot always be found in social spaces. When surrounded by others, there is often an unspoken demand to regulate behavior, filter thoughts, and maintain roles. Even subtle social expectations consume mental energy. For a highly intelligent mind, constantly monitoring how one is perceived can interfere with authentic thinking. Alone, that monitoring shuts down. The mind no longer has to split attention between inner processing and outer presentation. This preference for solitude is frequently misunderstood. It is often labeled as antisocial behavior or emotional withdrawal. In reality, it is a strategic choice. Deep thinkers recognize that constant interaction can dilute focus. Conversations that require simplifying ideas or suppressing nuance feel restrictive. Solitude removes the need to compress complex thoughts into socially digestible forms. As intelligence increases, sensitivity to stimuli often increases as well. Noise, interruptions, and rapid topic shifts can become overwhelming. Solitude acts as a filter, reducing sensory input and allowing the nervous system to regulate. This creates mental clarity and emotional balance. What appears from the outside as isolation is, from the inside, alignment. Solitude also strengthens self-reliance. When time alone is spent thinking, reflecting, and exploring ideas, the individual becomes less dependent on external feedback. Decisions are made based on internal reasoning rather than group consensus. This autonomy reinforces the value of solitude. The person learns that they can generate insight, motivation, and direction without constant social input. Over time, this creates a noticeable difference in how intelligent individuals approach relationships. They are less likely to seek company for distraction. Instead, they look for connection that adds value to their inner world. Social interaction becomes intentional rather than habitual. This selectivity further reduces the frequency of interaction, but increases its quality. Solitude also allows for emotional processing. Intelligent individuals tend to experience emotions deeply, even if they do not express them outwardly. Alone time provides space to examine feelings without judgment or interruption. This leads to emotional clarity. Rather than reacting impulsively, the person can understand the source of their emotions and respond thoughtfully. In this way, solitude becomes a tool for emotional regulation. It prevents emotional overload that can occur in socially dense environments. This is particularly important for those who are highly perceptive. Constant exposure to others, emotions, moods, and expectations can be draining. Solitude offers relief. Another important aspect is creative thinking. Many forms of creativity require uninterrupted mental exploration. Deep thinkers often generate ideas that challenge norms or connect distant concepts. These ideas need incubation. Solitude provides the conditions for creativity to develop fully without being prematurely judged or dismissed. This creative solitude is often misread as detachment from reality. In truth, it is engagement with reality at a deeper level. While others are focused on immediate social dynamics, the intelligent mind is examining underlying patterns, long-term implications, and abstract possibilities. This kind of engagement is difficult to sustain in group settings. As solitude becomes more rewarding, the individual may feel less urgency to socialize. This can create a widening gap between them and others who rely on frequent interaction for emotional fulfillment. The gap is not based on superiority, but on different sources of nourishment. Where some people recharge through social energy, deep thinkers recharge through mental space. This difference can lead to misunderstandings. Friends may feel neglected. Others may interpret withdrawal as rejection. The intelligent individual may struggle to explain that their need for solitude is not a reflection of others' worth, but of their own cognitive needs. Often, they stop explaining altogether and simply adjust their lifestyle to protect their mental health. Solitude also encourages honesty with oneself. Without external influence, the mind confronts its own contradictions, fears, and desires. This self-confrontation can be uncomfortable, which is why many people avoid being alone. Intelligent individuals, however, often accept this discomfort because it leads to growth. They learn more about who they are and what they value. As a result, solitude becomes associated with clarity rather than loneliness. Being alone does not feel empty, it feels full. Thoughts, ideas, and insights occupy the space that others fill with noise. This internal richness reduces the need for constant external stimulation. Over time, this preference shapes identity. The individual sees themselves as someone who thinks deeply, values focus, and prioritizes meaning over constant connection. This identity further reinforces solitude as a natural state. Social interaction becomes a choice rather than a requirement. The paradox is that this kind of solitude can make intelligent individuals better companions when they do engage. With a well-developed inner world, they bring depth, insight, and presence to interactions. However, because they engage less frequently, these moments are rare. In the end, solitude is not a rejection of the world, but a relationship with it on one's own terms. It allows the intelligent mind to function at its natural depth, free from unnecessary interference, guided by curiosity rather than obligation. As intelligence evolves, the mind begins to prioritize meaning over approval. Early in life, people often seek validation through achievements, social acceptance, or external recognition. Praise, compliments, and affirmation provide a sense of security and belonging. At lower levels of intelligence, these forms of approval carry significant weight because they reinforce identity and social integration. The brain associates recognition with safety and success, creating a feedback loop that motivates conformity and socially acceptable behavior. As intelligence grows, however, the mind starts questioning these external signals. It begins to evaluate their true value rather than automatically accepting them as measures of worth. The intelligent mind notices that approval is often conditional. Praise can be fleeting, superficial, or influenced by ulterior motives. Recognition may reward performance rather than authenticity, encouraging behavior that aligns with expectation rather than personal insight. Over time, this realization shifts priorities. External validation becomes unreliable as a source of identity or motivation. The individual learns to measure their worth through internal criteria, assessing whether actions align with values, principles, and long-term goals rather than short-term social reward. This transition marks a critical shift in social behavior. The desire to please or impress diminishes because the mind recognizes the emptiness of performing for others. Decisions are increasingly guided by understanding, integrity, and strategic thinking, rather than by the potential reaction of peers. Conversations, choices, and actions begin to reflect internal coherence rather than conformity. This shift can create tension with those who operate primarily through social reinforcement, as the intelligent person's motives may no longer be immediately apparent or relatable. As approval loses importance, freedom emerges. The mind is liberated from the constant monitoring of social signals, from the pressure to project a certain image, and from the anxiety of judgment. This mental autonomy allows the individual to explore ideas, take risks, and pursue goals that may be unconventional or misunderstood. Creativity and originality flourish because the intelligent mind is no longer constrained by the need to meet the expectations of others. Detachment from approval also changes emotional experience. Rejection or criticism, which previously could provoke intense stress or insecurity, loses its power. The mind understands that opinions are often projections, influenced by limited perspective, personal bias, or transient mood. Feedback is evaluated for its informational value rather than its emotional impact. This perspective allows for more objective self-assessment and reduces the vulnerability that comes from dependence on external affirmation. This shift influences relationships as well. Connections built primarily on admiration or approval may no longer feel fulfilling. The intelligent individual seeks relationships grounded in understanding, respect, and shared values rather than validation. This preference often narrows social circles, but strengthens the quality and depth of remaining connections. Interaction becomes intentional and mutually enriching rather than habitual or performative. The detachment from approval also affects public behavior. The mind may choose to remain silent when a situation demands conformity or to express opinions that contradict popular sentiment. Actions are guided by principle rather than popularity, which can provoke misunderstanding or discomfort in others. Those who operate primarily through social reinforcement may perceive this behavior as arrogance, aloofness, or unconventionality, when it is, in fact, a reflection of internal alignment. This alignment between action and principle fosters self-confidence. The mind no longer depends on others to affirm worth. Confidence is rooted in self-knowledge, competence, and clarity of intention. This internal grounding creates resilience, allowing the individual to navigate criticism, pressure, or conflict without destabilization. Confidence is no longer performative. It is intrinsic and silent, often perceived by others as calm authority or quiet strength. Over time, the rejection of external approval can create a sense of isolation, but it is a different kind of isolation. It is not born of social fear or rejection, but from selectivity. The intelligent mind chooses engagement over conformity, depth over superficiality, and principle over popularity. This choice naturally reduces exposure to environments that prioritize trivial recognition over meaningful interaction. Solitude becomes a byproduct of prioritizing internal alignment. This internal focus also enhances strategic thinking. Without the distraction of seeking approval, the mind can allocate energy toward understanding systems, analyzing behavior, and anticipating outcomes. Decisions are less reactive and more intentional. Patterns emerge more clearly, and long-term consequences are evaluated more rigorously. Detachment from social affirmation sharpens judgment because choices are measured against internal metrics rather than external expectations. Moreover, rejecting the need for approval strengthens emotional intelligence. The mind can observe social dynamics without being unduly influenced by them. Empathy is maintained, but it is informed by understanding rather than desire for acceptance. This allows for balanced responses, measured engagement, and subtle influence, creating the appearance of quiet mastery. The intelligent individual also develops a heightened tolerance for discomfort. Social disapproval, misunderstanding, or criticism no longer carry the emotional weight they once did. These experiences are seen as data, opportunities for reflection, or confirmation that internal criteria are being maintained. Over time, the mind becomes resilient to social volatility, anchored by its own reasoning and values rather than the fluctuating opinions of others. As a result, life choices become more deliberate. Careers, creative pursuits, and personal goals are selected based on intrinsic satisfaction and strategic alignment rather than external validation. Relationships are nurtured when they contribute to growth, insight, or authenticity. The intelligent mind prioritizes activities and connections that sustain its internal framework, avoiding distractions that offer social reward without meaningful return. This detachment from approval also enhances clarity in communication. Words are chosen intentionally, arguments are constructed thoughtfully, and expressions are aligned with thought rather than expectation. The intelligent individual learns that true influence often comes from authenticity, consistency, and understanding rather than performative charm or conformity. In sum, as intelligence advances, the desire for external approval diminishes, giving way to internal alignment, autonomy, and strategic focus. This creates a mind that acts deliberately, prioritizes meaning, and experiences freedom from social pressures. The resulting independence is not isolation in a negative sense, but a conscious decision to live in accordance with principles, values, and deep understanding, rather than transient affirmation. At close, building a mind that prioritizes meaning over approval is about reclaiming your internal authority. It is about making decisions based on principles, values, and insight rather than the fluctuating judgments of others. Each shift, detaching from external validation, choosing depth over conformity, protecting mental energy, mastering emotional responses, and embracing solitude, creates layers of inner strength that quietly shape presence, influence, and resilience. A mind aligned with its own standards moves through the world with clarity and confidence, unaffected by superficial praise or criticism. This psychological independence allows you to act intentionally, think deeply, and connect selectively, cultivating a level of mental power and focus that commands respect without effort and navigates life on your own terms. It is the kind of strength that does not need to announce itself. because it shows through calm, deliberate action, unshakable focus, and a presence that naturally inspires both admiration and subtle awe.